Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Heimdallr H28. This watch is available from heimdallrwatch.com for $149 which is €142. So firstly, let's look at the box that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the specifications of the piece. So the watch comes in a cardboard watch box which is protected by this white cardboard outer sleeve. I'll remove the lid and show you the interior. So inside the watch box we have a foam cutout panel which does a good job of protecting the watch in shipping from any damage. You remove the foam cutout panel and beneath it is a secondary foam panel. You remove the second panel and that reveals the items which I'll show you. So with the watch you get this owner's instruction manual in English. It details the operation of the movement used, which is the Seiko NH35A automatic. You also get this warranty card, and I'm pleased to report the H28 is covered by a 2-year international warranty, which is good. This is the plastic tag that comes to the watch. As you can see, it has the Heimdallr shark, which is the old logo. On the watch it features the new Heimdallr logo, and there's also a cardboard Heimdallr tag, as you can see. And one also gets a spring bar tool which is made from stainless steel, nailed shank, finished to a good standard, 2-prong fork at one end and push pin at the other end, as one would expect. And lastly, you also get this bracelet resizing tool, because the oyster style bracelet uses push pins rather than screw pins, and it rattles because the base is removable. Inside the body you have 2 spare push pins, which is good because sometimes if you get the alignment incorrect when pushing out the pins of a push pin bracelet, you can bend the stainless steel push pin. So this is good that you can replace it. They simply screw into the plastic threaded bolt, as you can see. And it is reasonable quality, and it will suffice if you want to resize the bracelet and remove the push pins, and it's good to get the spare 2 links included in the base, which you just simply remove. So with regards to the specifications of the piece, we have a 40mm case diameter. Now the thing to note is, although it's a 40mm head of the piece, the bezel overhangs the flanks of the case. The bezel diameter is 40.9, so it's 0.9 of a millimeter larger than the head of the piece. So although it's a 40mm case, it does look and wear more like a 41 due to the 40.9mm bezel overhang. We have a 48.8mm lug-to-lug measurement, a thickness of 12.5mm, and a lug width of 20mm. The oyster style bracelet tapers from 20mm at the lugs down to 16mm at the 2-button push clasp, and as you can see, the 2-button push clasp is sterile. It's not signed with the Heimdallr logo or brand emblem, which is a disappointment. This is a clear cost-cutting measure, and I think that they really need to consider engraving the new updated Heimdallr emblem, or alternatively Heimdallr logo, because it just is unacceptable at this price point, €142, to have a sterile clasp. Double dome sapphire crystal with blue tinted AR coating. Now this is subjective. I personally think that clear AR coating is more aesthetically pleasing. The blue tinted AR coating does work well to reduce the glare and the highly reflective nature of the silver mirror polished applied indices and the silver mirror polished Mercedes handset. There is a blue hue to it when you tilt the piece at an oblique angle. I personally think that blue dial watches suit blue tinted AR coating, but with other dial colours, clear AR coating gives superior clarity, and I think it would look better if they use clear AR coating on this piece rather than blue tinted. So double dome sapphire crystal is correctly proportioned. There's a very slight dome to it which projects above the top edge of the ceramic bezel insert. The coin edge bezel is solid 316L grade stainless steel. Nice mirror polished chamfer to the top edge of the coin edge teeth. No sharp edges to the teeth, but they do feel very grippy and tactile, and it is very well finished. The chamfer is mirror polished to a flawless standard, so very good quality coin edge finishing, and they deserve credit for that. Now with regards to the indices, you can see we have larger rectangular indices at 12, 9 and 3. I personally would prefer if all the indices on the dial were the same size. I appreciate that Heimdallr are trying to do something different rather than cloning this watch on the original Black Bay or Submariner dial layouts, which are often used by low-tier Chinese brands. They've tried to come up with a different dial design, but I dislike the larger 12, 9 and 3 indices. I think that the size of the indices would look more symmetrical and more aesthetically pleasing if they were all the same size. The date complication is at 6 o'clock, and I think they've made the correct decision because they've used a black date wheel with white Arabic numerals. Often brands use a white date wheel with black Arabic numerals. I think the black date wheel blends very well with a matte black dial. Quality of the printing to the Heimdallr logo, which is updated, the emblem and also the text is very good. And also the quality of the printing of the text, water 200 meter resist automatic at 6 o'clock, is also done to a good standard. So quality of the applied indices is good, the mirror polishing is good, and the proportions of the handset are correct. The minute hand tip extends all the way to the white minute ticks on the chapter ring, and the Mercedes hour hand is also correctly proportioned because it extends to the applied indices. The second hand is long enough to reach the minute ticks on the 60-second ticks. So the handset is correct, and this is something that often low-tier Chinese brands get incorrect. The handsets are under proportions, they're too small and too short, but these hands are correct for the dial size. Finishing to the head of the piece is very good. Longitudinal brush satin finishing to the flanks has a nice grained finish, beautiful luster to it. No sharp edges to the undercuts or the tips of the lugs, and it's got a nice mirror polished chamfer, which marks the transition between the top of the lugs and the flanks. The case shape and proportions reminds me of a Tudor Black Bay, and it has that characteristic mirror polished bevel as per a Black Bay case, and I think Heimdallr have done a good job with the proportions and also the finishing. They've made the correct decision by using brush satin finishing on the flanks rather than mirror polishing, because it does give the watch a tall watch aesthetic. But it does have rather tall slab sides as per a Black Bay, and I think that they could reduce the thickness of the slab sides to the flanks, and that would make it more aesthetically pleasing, and reduce the thickness of the piece below 12.5 millimeters. Now, with regards to the bracelet, female pivoted end links are the correct choice because male end links would extend the effective lug-to-lug measurement. This is a slightly long piece because it's 48.8 millimeters long on a 40 millimeter diameter head of the piece. So I would say if you're a collector with a 6 to 7 inch wrist, you may find the 48.8 to be too long. 48 is the sweet spot. It is the perfect lug-to-lug measurement, regardless of whether you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist or a 7 to 8 inch wrist, respectively. At 48.8, it's nearly 49 long, and therefore the tips of the lugs will overhang if you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist, but they will suffice if you have a 7 to 8 inch wrist. So female pivoted end links articulate okay. They're not very smooth, but they don't kink, so that is acceptable. Quality of the oyster style bracelet is finished well. No sharp edges, no burrs to the flanks, so it doesn't scratch the wrist, doesn't pull arm hair, and the links articulate smoothly. The bracelet doesn't feel stiff, it doesn't kink, and there's not excess play, despite the use of push pins, which are a clear cost-cutting measure. Now, at €142, I would like to see screw pins used rather than push pins, because push pins are a cost-cutting measure. But having said that, the tolerances are good enough. It doesn't rattle, it doesn't feel too sloppy, and I think they've done a good enough job of the finishing. The mirror polishing is done to a good standard on the flanks, and that contrasts with the brush satin finishing to the 316L grade stainless steel. So finishing is good. But really, the main disappointment to this watch is the clasp. It's got a very light gauge of 316L grade stainless steel. They need to make the gauge heavier. The other thing is, it's only got 2 micro adjustments. Now bear in mind, this oyster style bracelet does not have any half links. It doesn't have a half link either side of the clasp. So therefore it's going to be difficult to get the correct fit because one only has 2 micro adjustments, which is the absolute minimum. I would like to see Heimdallr increase the length of the clasp and also the gauge, and use 5 or 6 holes in the flanks, and therefore one could get a better fit, because it's going to be very difficult to get the perfect fit with only half a link of adjustment. I'll show you the interior. Solid mill 316L grade stainless steel, as one would expect. Brush satin finishing is good, nice luster to it. Let's check the hinge pins for play. They feel tight. All 3 pins are good. Minimal play on the hinge pin into the body, which is acceptable. So the quality of the finishing is good. No sharp edges, doesn't have sharp corners, and it closes with a nice positive click. But however, it's not very well executed, and I'll give you a wrist shot and explain why. Now, I haven't sized the bracelet. When you close the clasp, you have to really push it hard to get it to click. It doesn't snap shut with a nice positive click, a light action. For example, normally with a 2-button push clasp, you simply press it lightly and it clicks shut. With this one, you really have to push it hard with your thumb like that to get it to engage. And there is room for improvement on the quality control and also the tolerances, because a 2-button push clasp should snap shut with a light click, but this takes excessive force. You really have to press it very hard into the wrist, and it's uncomfortable because you have to press it so hard that the clasp digs into your wrist every time you want to close it. It does release okay, medium resistance to the 2 spring-loaded triggers, so it opens without any resistance. But I think there's room for improvement on that. They should really update the clasp and include a ratcheting mechanism, or alternatively micro-adjustment. So I'll show you the case back. Solid 316L grade stainless steel, longitudinal brushed satin finishing to it, sterile, coin edge finishing, and it's low profile. It's good they haven't used the bubble back profile. It's a very flat, sterile case back. As you can see, the center section is perfectly flat, so it feels comfortable and sits very snug against the wrist. And it provides 200 meters of hermetic seal, which is very good. So the case back is finished to a good standard, no sharp edges to the teeth, and it doesn't scratch the wrist. The solid end links use conventional stainless steel spring bars rather than quick release spring bars, but they're a good tight fit to the head of the piece. So I'll give you a wrist shot and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist. Now, as you can see, it's a snug fit. I haven't sized the bracelet, and it's a tight fit to get an index finger underneath the bracelet and clasp. So really 8 inches is the maximum length this bracelet will fit. That's something to bear in mind. If you're a collector with a larger wrist of over 8 inches, this is going to be too tight. So, as I've detailed, it's got a long lug-to-lug measurement of 48.8, and even on my 8-inch wrist, you can see there is a gap underneath the tips of the lugs, and it's a low-profile piece at only 12.5, bearing in mind it does use the NH35A, but however, I would say if you're a collector with a 6 to 7-inch wrist, you will find that it's too long, and due to the overhang on the bezel, it wears like a 41mm head of the piece, because the bezel is 40.9 as I've detailed on a 40mm head of the piece. So in terms of fit and comfort level, it feels very similar to a Tudor Black Bay with a 41mm case. It does feel quite top heavy. It doesn't feel very well balanced due to the 20 to 16 taper. Also, it's got a very tall slab-sided profile to the flanks, as you can see. And I think that they could have reduced the height of the flanks, as you can see, because it does really look like the slab sides on a Tudor Black Bay with a 41mm case size. So the dimensions really are too large. They should have reduced the lug-to-lug to 48. It's 48.8, slightly too long. Also, the bezel overhang is excessive at 40.9. They should have made the bezel the same diameter as the head of the piece without an overhang. A 40mm bezel would have given it a better look. It would wear more like a 40 rather than a 41. And as you can see, the blue tinted AR coating is subjective. Some collectors will like it. I personally prefer clear AR coating rather than having the blue hue. I do like the profile of the double dome sapphire crystal, which projects above the ceramic bezel inset, and I do like the low profile coin edge bezel, which gives it a vintage aesthetic, or it looks like a Tudor Black Bay, and the mirror polished chamfer to the top edge of the coin edge bezel is done very well. It catches the light. The female pivoted end links articulate very well. They pull the end link in the oyster style bracelet snug to the wrist, so they do work well. They've made the correct decision by not using male end links, which would make the end link in the bracelet stick out and increase the gap underneath the head of the piece. So comfortable piece to wear, but it does feel top heavy despite being only 153 grams. And that's something to bear in mind. So really I would say it's a piece that's best suited to collectors with a 7 to 8 inch wrist. If you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist, it's too large and top heavy. Right, so 120 click unidirectional bezel, as one would expect. Let's test the bezel execution. Medium resistance to it. It feels similar to a Seiko 5KX. It feels heavier than a Pagani designed PD1661, which you may be familiar with. But however, it doesn't feel even all the way through the 360 degrees of rotation. The bezel gets tighter and looser and tighter and so on. And that's a disappointment because the medium resistance feels good. But the problem is it doesn't stay medium resistance. It gets light and then it gets tighter and then light again. And as you rotate through the 360 degrees, it's noticeable. It just doesn't feel smooth. It doesn't feel consistent resistance all the way around the 360 degrees. It gets tight, then loose, then tight again. So there's room for improvement with regards to the build quality and the quality control, the tolerances of the teeth in the casting of the bezel, and also the quality of the click spring used for the ratcheting mechanism. Let's check for lateral side-to-side play. Now the other negative is we have slight lateral side-to-side play. I'm just going to check it in 4 positions for consistency, because when I level criticism at a brand, I like to be fair rather than biased. So that's 2, we've still got play, 3, and lastly I'll check it a 4th time. So we have lateral side-to-side play all the way around the bezel. I always check it for lateral side-to-side play in 4 positions when there's play, just to be certain. It's disappointing. We're not looking at a low-tip piece costing below €100, such as a Pagani design PD1661. This is €142, so the quality of the bezel execution needs to be correct at this price point. Lateral side-to-side play is wholly unacceptable. We've also got slight back play, and again I'm just going to check it in more positions to make sure that it is throughout the rotation. So we've got a slight half a click of back play in every position on the bezel. It feels too loose. Lateral side-to-side play, but also we've got back play as well. So I'll just check the alignment. One more click. The Lume triangle doesn't align correctly. It's slightly to the left of the 60-minute tick and the 12 o'clock index on the dial. So again, for consistency, when I level criticism at a brand, I like to be fair. I'm going to check it 2 more times, just to make sure. Right, so we're now 1 click to the right of the 12 o'clock index and the 60-minute tick on the chapter ring. 1 more click should give us perfect alignment. And again, slightly to the left. I'll check it 1 more time. And then you can be absolutely certain that I'm being correct when I say that the bezel is misaligned. It's just an unpleasant bezel to use because the resistance varies so much between it getting lighter and tighter through the 360 degrees. Then we've got the lateral side-to-side play as well and the slight back play. Right, so we're now 1 click to the right. 1 more click should be perfectly aligned. And again, 3 out of 3 times, the Lume triangle is slightly to the left of the 60-minute tick on the chapter ring and the 12 o'clock index on the dial. It's just slight, but 3 out of 3 times it's always to the left. It's not bang on. Again, €142, wholly unacceptable to have this kind of bezel execution. So we've got a problem with the consistency of the resistance. It gets lighter and tighter. Lateral side-to-side play, half a click of back play, and then we've got misalignment. So they've got every single aspect of the bezel execution incorrect, which is a real disappointment. Right, so let's test the screw-down crown execution. Solid 316L grade stainless steel crown, coinage finish to match the bezel, which is good. Mirror polished stones cap to it, which is done to a good standard, but it's sterile, like the clasp. This is wholly unacceptable. Heimdallr used to use their shark emblem on their crowns on dive pieces, which was good because it matched the Heimdallr emblem shark on the dial and also on the clasp, as one would expect. But now they've updated the logo, as you can see. We've got the new updated Heimdallr logo. We don't have the old shark logo embossed on the dial. And what they've done is they've deleted the shark logo on the crown and also on the clasp. They're now sterile as a production cost-cutting measure because it's expensive to produce the tooling, the moulds to use to produce a moulded crown and also moulded bracelet with the engraving. But this is a clear cost-cutting measure and it's wholly unacceptable because we're not looking at a piece that's under €100. At €142, we need to have an engraved or embossed emblem to the brand. And I think it's a real disappointment, but let's check the screw-down crown execution. It feels very stiff, and this is a real disappointment. It's not stiffness due to friction of the rubber O-rings. There are 2 rubber O-rings in a 200-metre screw-down crown. There's one rubber O-ring gasket inside the crown and a second rubber O-ring gasket inside the stainless steel crown tube. And those 2 hermetic seals provide 200 metres of hermetic seal. On a Rolex triplock crown, there are 3 rubber O-rings and that provides 3 layers of hermetic seal, so you get 300 meters. But this has 2 rubber O-rings, and the friction isn't caused by the 2 rubber O-rings. We're feeling the friction of the threading. The internal thread of the stainless steel crown is rubbing against the stainless steel threading on the crown tube itself. So it's poor machining, the tolerances need to be improved, the quality control needs to be improved. Now it does unscrew okay, but it just feels stiff, and it really does take a lot of torsion to unscrew it. The other negative is it's undersized, because this crown really does look and feel too small for a piece that's like this. It's 40 millimeters, but it looks like a 41 due to the bezel overhang. They really need to increase the proportions. This is the kind of crown one would expect to see on a 36mm head of the piece, not a 40mm dive watch. We're not looking at a daily wear piece or a dress piece. This kind of crown is too small for a dive piece. It should have a larger crown as per a Tudor Black Bay, for example. That is correctly proportioned with a coin edge finish to it. So, pulling it out to the first click position is the quick set date complication, because the NH35A has a date complication at 6, as you can see. So rotating the crown anti-clockwise advances the quick set complication. Nice positive clicks. That's something I really like about the NH35A. The quick set complication clicks over. Every day of the month has a nice solid click, and it's very satisfying to use. Pulling it out to the second click position hacks the movement. If you look at the second hand, you can see it's now stopped dead. I've now hacked the movement. So we're now in the time setting position. Nice firm resistance to the NH35A, minimal back play clockwise and anti-clockwise, and it feels smooth all the way through the 360 degrees. So when you're setting the time, it's an absolute pleasure. The NH35A is one of my favourite movements. Pushing it back in, it's got a nice positive click, and that restarts the movement. The second hand begins to sweep around the dial once again. So let's test screwing the crown back down. Now it does pick up, but it's not excellent. It's not immediate thread pickup. It takes a couple of turns. Sometimes you have to rotate it clockwise and anti-clockwise a few times in order to find the pickup in the threads. The internal thread of the stainless steel crown needs to pick up with the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. So it's not a good pickup, although it does work okay. It takes a couple of attempts. It does feel very stiff screwing it back down. One can feel the resistance of the threading. So the tolerances are not good, and they really need to improve upon the quality control. Yes, it does screw down okay, and it will provide 200 meters of hermetic seal, but I think that it's not good enough at this price point, €142. Right, so let's do a Lume test, and we'll see how the Lume performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see, initially the exciter appears to glow brightly, both on the applied indices, the Lume pip and triangle, and also the Mercedes handset. But I can tell you there's a colour tone mismatch, and this indicates that they've applied 5 to 6 layers of BGW9 Super Lume Nova on the Mercedes handset, but a less number of layers on the applied indices, such as 3 to 4. Now as you're looking at it, you'll see that the indices begin to fade quicker than on the Mercedes handset, and also the Lume pip in the triangle on the ceramic bezel insert. The colour tone match isn't quite correct. The hands appear to glow brighter. They're whiter coloured BGW9 than on the indices, and I can see now the indices are fading at a quicker rate. The exciter in the BGW9 is not as strong on the applied indices as on the handset, and this is a clear cost-cutting measure. It looks like they've applied 3 to 4 layers of BGW9 on the dial as a cost-cutting measure, but 5 to 6 on the Mercedes handset and 5 to 6 in the Lume pip on the bezel. Again, these kind of cost-cutting measures one can be magnanimous about below €100, but not on a piece costing over €100. So I think that they could improve upon the colour match, but also the layers used on the dial. They should apply 5 to 6, because the indices and the Mercedes handset do not have the exact same tone, and the indices are not glowing as brightly as the handset. They're now beginning to fade, and as time goes on, the dial is going to fade faster than the handset. They should fade at the same rate. The exciter should be as bright on both the dial and the hands. So cost-cutting measure on the dial and a clear disappointment. Right, so let's discuss the movement use because it's one of my favourite aspects of the piece. You will all be familiar with the Seiko NH35A Automatic, which was made from 2011 onwards, so at this stage it's a reliable, well-proven workhorse movement. It's made in Malaysia and it has 24 joules. It runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 3 Hz. It has hand binding and hacking, which is used for complications and also date complication. 41-hour power reserve is perfectly acceptable, and the stated accuracy of the NH35A is -20 to +40 seconds per day, so a rather wide accuracy range. However, I'm pleased to report that this one is regulated to +10 seconds per day, which is well within the -10 to +40 stated accuracy. But however, +10 isn't very impressive because an NH35A can be regulated to much better than the stated accuracy of -10 to +20, -20 to +40 seconds per day. It's nothing unusual for an NH35A to run within ±5 seconds per day after regulation in 5 positions. +10 really isn't good enough. I would like to see Heimdallr improve upon the regulation. If they regulated the NH35A in 5 positions, they could easily get it down to between -5 to +5 seconds per day. +10 really is the minimum. So it's okay, it's acceptable accuracy, but the NH35A can perform better if you regulate it better. So again, something that Heimdallr could improve upon. But it's a good choice of movements, and at this price point, €142, yes, the NH35A is correct. 12.5 thickness is okay. Anything below 13mm will easily slip underneath a shirt cuff if you wear business shirts, and with a 200-metre water-resistant piece and an NH35A, yes, 12.5 is acceptable. So they've got the thickness correct, but unfortunately they've got the proportions of the head of the piece incorrect. The bezel overhangs by too much, 40.9. It overhangs by 0.9mm. They should have made the bezel 40 to match the case. They've made the lug-to-lug too long at 48.8. Even for an 8-inch wrist, 48 is the sweet spot, 48.8 is nearly 49 long. So the case is too long and the bezel is too wide. So the proportions are all incorrect and the crown is also undersized. It looks like a crown from a daily wear piece or a dress piece. This is not a large enough crown for a dive piece. So room for improvement with regards to the proportions. It feels like a top-heavy piece and therefore not comfortable despite being only 153 grams. One would expect it to be balanced on a 20 to 16 bracelet. So too many shortcomings. The main thing is the bezel execution is dreadful because we've got lateral side-side play, back play, misalignment, and also the resistance through the 360 degrees isn't consistent. The cross-cutting measure of the sterile clasp, which is too light gauge, only a minimum of 2 micro adjustments, and then we've also got the sterile crown. So it's cross-cutting measure after cross-cutting measure. If this were below €100, I would be magnanimous about the shortcomings, but at 142, no, because even the watch box is a cardboard watch box, so it's just cross-cutting measure to the extreme. So I'm going to recommend it to you for consideration, but bear in mind the QC issues, bear in mind the cost-cutting measures at €142. I'm going to say it's okay value, but poor quality. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Heimdallr H28. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you for watching.